Between 1978 and 1991, Dahmer murdered 17 people, 16 in Wisconsin, 1 in Ohio. Most were young, gay men of color, men he met in bars, on sidewalks, in public places where danger didn't announce itself. Dahmer didn't force his way into lives. He invited people in. He offered money, alcohol, a place to relax, sometimes payment for nude photographs. Once inside, the tone shifted. Dahmer poured the drinks himself. Inside them, sedatives. Victims became dizzy, disoriented, heavy. Some believed they were just drunk. Others tried to stand and couldn't. By the time fear set in, their bodies no longer obeyed. Dahmer waited. He didn't use guns. He didn't use knives. He strangled his victims. Strangulation required closeness, control, time. Dahmer later admitted he preferred it that way, watching resistance fade, breath slow, life stop. For him, this was not anger, it was fulfillment. Death wasn't the end. Inside his apartment, Dahmer dismembered the bodies with precision. Flesh separated from bone, organs removed. Some remains were discarded in trash bags across the city. Others were kept. Dahmer used acid to dissolve flesh inside a large drum stored in his apartment, a 57-gallon container that erased bodies piece by piece. The smell was unbearable. Neighbors complained repeatedly. No one searched. Dahmer kept what mattered to him: hands, genitalia, skulls. Some skulls were bleached, others painted. He stored body parts in his refrigerator and freezer, including the heart and bicep. When asked why, Dahmer gave a chilling answer. He said he wanted to keep them with him, forever. Dahmer engaged in necrophilia. He admitted to cannibalism. He cooked parts of his victims, consumed them, not out of hunger, but belief. He thought that by eating them, they could never leave. He documented everything. Using a Polaroid camera, Dahmer photographed his victims at every stage: alive, unconscious, dead, dismembered. The images were kept casually, as memories. In his final murders, Dahmer escalated. He no longer wanted victims who could wake up and leave. He wanted total control. He drilled holes into skulls, injected acid or boiling water. The victims were alive, drugged, helpless. His goal was to create living zombies, people who could move but never resist. Every attempt failed. Every victim died. There were chances to stop him. Police encountered Dahmer more than once, spoke to him, believed him. In one case, officers returned a bleeding teenage boy directly to his apartment. The system failed, again and again, until one man escaped, barely alive, confused, terrified. When police entered Dahmer's apartment in 1991, the truth was undeniable. Photographs, human remains, a freezer. What they discovered wasn't a single crime. It was a decade of silence. Jeffrey Dahmer didn't hide. He lived among people. And while the world looked away, he kept killing.
My name is Axel, and on this channel, we don't rush to judgment. We don't chase shock. We don't reduce real lives into headlines. We slow down, we look closer, and we ask the questions that never make it into court records, because every crime has an ending, but it always begins somewhere else. Tonight's story is one of the most documented cases in American history, a name you already know, a case that was officially closed decades ago, and yet people still ask the same question. How does someone become Jeffrey Dahmer? Not the monster, not the headline, but the child.
Jeffrey Lionel Dahmer was born on May 21, 1960, in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. He was the first of two sons. His father, Lionel Dahmer, was a chemistry student who would later become a research chemist. His mother, Joyce Dahmer, worked as a teletype machine instructor. On paper, this was an ordinary American family, educated, stable, quiet. But families are not built on paper. They are built on presence, on attention, on emotional safety, and those things were already fragile. Accounts of Dahmer's infancy vary. Some say he lacked attention. Others say he was doted upon. But what remains consistent is this: his home was tense. His mother struggled with depression, illness, and emotional volatility. She demanded constant attention. She spent long periods confined to bed. At one point, she attempted suicide. His father was often absent, focused on studies, later work. When he was home, the house was rarely calm. Arguments were frequent, voices were raised, doors were shut. Years later, Dahmer would describe his childhood with a single phrase. He felt unsure of the solidity of his family. That instability matters, especially to a child who is learning how the world works. Shortly before his 4th birthday, Jeffrey underwent double hernia surgery. After that, something shifted. Family members noticed it. Teachers noticed it. The energetic, expressive child became quiet, withdrawn, subdued. At school, he was timid, reserved, often alone. One teacher later recalled sensing early signs of abandonment, not neglect in the traditional sense, but emotional absence, and emotional absence can be just as powerful. The Dahmer family moved frequently. By the time Jeffrey was 8 years old, they had lived in multiple homes across different towns. Eventually, they settled in Bath Township, Ohio, in a house surrounded by woods. Isolation increased. Supervision decreased. This mattered because it was here that Jeffrey's inner world began to take a darker shape. Jeffrey's father, Lionel, loved science, chemistry, structure, processes. One day, while working beneath the family home, Lionel removed animal bones from the soil. Jeffrey watched, and something clicked. He was fascinated, not with death itself, but with what remained after life. Bones, structure, how things fit together. Lionel, believing this was scientific curiosity, showed his son how to bleach and preserve animal bones safely. This moment is important, not because it caused what came later, but because it normalized a private fascination. Jeffrey began collecting dead animals, preserving them, storing them. This became his secret world. While Jeffrey retreated inward, his parents' marriage collapsed. His mother's dependency on medication increased. Her emotional distance grew wider. Counseling failed. Affairs surfaced. Arguments intensified. By 1978, the family fractured completely. His father moved out. His mother left the home with his younger brother. And Jeffrey, newly 18, was left alone in the house. A quiet boy, with growing fantasies, with alcohol, with no supervision. The family unit was gone. I want you to picture this. An empty house. No parents. No rules. No witnesses. Jeffrey Dahmer was 18 years old, 3 weeks out of high school, alone, and terrified of being alone. That's when he picked up Stephen Hicks. Stephen was hitchhiking to a concert. Nothing reckless, nothing suspicious, just a kid who trusted the wrong stranger. Dahmer didn't lure him with violence. He offered beer, music, company, and for hours nothing happened. This matters, because the killing didn't come from anger, it came from fear. Stephen wanted to leave, and Dahmer didn't want to be abandoned, so he stopped him. A dumbbell, a strike from behind, then his hands tightening until Stephen stopped moving. And I want you to understand this part clearly. This wasn't chaos. Afterward, Dahmer was calm. He touched the body, explored it, and then he took it apart. Days later, there was nothing left. No evidence, no missing person urgency, no consequences.
And when nothing happens after your first murder, something inside you learns a dangerous lesson. For 9 years, Dahmer didn't kill again. But don't mistake that for recovery. Nothing was resolved. The fantasy didn't disappear. It matured. And when it returned without restraint.
Now, listen carefully, because this is where everything changes. In 1987, Dahmer met Stephen Tuomi at a bar. They went to a hotel room. Dahmer later said he didn't intend to kill him, but intention stopped mattering. When he woke up the next morning, Tuomi was dead, beaten, crushed, unrecognizable. And Dahmer said something chilling. He claimed he couldn't remember killing him. Whether that's true or not almost doesn't matter, because after this night, he stopped trying to stop himself. Tuomi wasn't just disposed of. Parts of him were kept. That urge to preserve, to possess, had fully arrived. From here on, I want you to notice how mechanical this becomes. Bars, promises of money, drugged drinks. James Dockstader was 14 years old. 14. Drugged, strangled, left in a basement for a week. Not rushed, not panicked, then dismembered. The skull boiled, then destroyed. Next came Richard Guerrero. Same pattern. The killings weren't emotional anymore. They were procedural. And that's when people become truly dangerous. Every serial killer story has a moment where the outcome could have changed. This was one of them. Ronald Flowers was drugged in Dahmer's grandmother's house. But someone spoke. A voice from upstairs. Reality intruded. Dahmer hesitated. Flowers survived. He woke up bruised, disoriented, aware something was wrong, but not what. And that moment passed. No report, no follow-up. The system blinked. When Dahmer killed Anthony Sears, something shifted again. This wasn't just about control anymore. Sears was attractive to him, and after killing him, Dahmer didn't destroy everything. He kept parts, not temporarily, permanently. Stored, moved, revisited. This wasn't just murder. This was ownership. Now we enter the Oxford apartments. This is where the killings accelerate, where bodies overlap, where time compresses. Raymond Smith was killed days after Dahmer moved in, photographed, dismembered, boiled. The remains were processed like materials. Then Edward Smith. Dahmer tried new methods, freezing, drying. When it failed, he didn't feel guilt. He felt frustration. That distinction matters. With Ernest Miller, the drugs weren't enough. So Dahmer used a knife. The killing was immediate, messy, irreversible. Organs were saved, consumed later. This wasn't improvisation, it was escalation. David Thomas didn't attract Dahmer, and that made him dangerous, because Dahmer killed him anyway. Not out of desire, but fear. Fear of losing control, fear of consequences. No parts were kept, only photographs. Proof that the process mattered more. By 1991, Dahmer wasn't satisfied with killing. He wanted submission before death. Curtis Stwater was restrained, strangled, preserved. Then Errol Lindsay, acid injected into his brain. And listen to this, he woke up, alive, confused. Dahmer killed him anyway. The experiment failed, but the idea didn't. From here, the killings blurred together. Tony Hughes, Conorak Synthesomsophone, Matt Turner, Jeremiah Weinberger, Oliver Lacey, Joseph Braidhoft. Bodies stacked faster than they could be erased. Odors filled the apartment. Freezers failed. Control disappeared. What remained wasn't planning. It was momentum. I want you to imagine this with me.
It's July 22, 1991. Milwaukee is quiet tonight, but inside one apartment, a storm is waiting. Jeffrey Dahmer is out hunting, waiting, searching for his next victim. And on this night, he chooses 3 men. One of them, Tracy Edwards, is about to change everything. Dahmer offers money, $100, for company, for photos, for a simple evening. Edwards agrees. They step into apartment 213, and the first thing hits him, a smell, foul, chemical, unnatural. Boxes of hydrochloric acid sit on the floor. Dahmer says it's for cleaning bricks. It's a story, a lie. Then Dahmer asks him to turn his head to look at his tropical fish, and suddenly handcuffs click onto his wrist. "What's happening?" Edwards asks. Dahmer tries to cuff the other wrist, fails, then insists Edwards go to the bedroom for photos. In the bedroom, Edwards notices the walls. Posters of nude men. A tape of The Exorcist 3 plays quietly. A blue drum looms in the corner. The smell is stronger. And then Dahmer produces a knife. Edwards realizes it. He is in immediate danger. Dahmer leans close, presses his head to Edwards' chest, listens to his heartbeat. "I intend to eat your heart," he whispers. Edwards doesn't panic. He can't. He stays calm. He waits. He watches. And when Dahmer looks away, he strikes, a punch to the face, a moment of chaos. Then he runs. The street is dark, but freedom is steps away. Edwards flags down the police. 2 officers, Routh and Mueller. The handcuff is still on his wrist. He explains, "A freak put this on me. Can you remove it?" The key doesn't fit. So Edwards leads them to the apartment of horrors. Inside, Dahmer greets them calmly. He admits to the handcuffs, but says nothing else. Edwards points out the knife. Dahmer doesn't respond. The officers move carefully through the apartment, and then they see it. Polaroids, human bodies, dismembered. One officer would later say it was more like dismantling someone's museum than a crime scene. Every shelf, every corner, every detail. Horrifying, meticulous, planned. And there he is, pinned to the floor, the man who terrorized a city, handcuffed, caught, exposed.
The early hours of July 23, 1991. Jeffrey Dahmer sits across from Detective Patrick Kennedy. Calm, collected. He's about to tell the world the truth. Over the next 2 weeks, Dahmer will spend over 60 hours recounting the horrors hidden inside apartment 213. He will confess in detail every murder, every ritual, every secret. He chooses to speak without a lawyer. Why? Because he says he wants to end it himself. He created this horror, and now only he can reveal it. Dahmer admits to killing 16 young men in Wisconsin since 1987, and one more, Stephen Hicks in Ohio, 1978. Most were rendered unconscious before their deaths, though some, he says, died after he injected acid or boiling water into their brains. He describes his ritual in chilling detail. Bodies were posed, chests thrust out, photographed, dismembered in the bathtub, internal organs removed, blood drained, flesh separated from bone. Bones he did not wish to keep were pulverized or dissolved in acid. Skulls and skeletons he kept were bleached and preserved. He admits, with a calmness that chills, he consumed hearts, livers, biceps, portions of thighs of 3 victims, Raymond Smith, Ernest Miller, and Oliver Lacey. At first, he says, it was curiosity, but later, he tells the detectives, it made him feel his victims were permanently a part of him. He explains the increase in his killing before his arrest. I was completely swept along, an incessant, never-ending desire to be with someone good-looking, really nice-looking. It filled my thoughts all day long. And the altar of skulls. 7 skulls, 2 entire skeletons, 4 severed heads. He planned to place them on a black table in his living room, with incense on either side, a large blue lamp above, and a black leather chair in front. When asked who the altar was dedicated to, he said simply, "Myself." It was a place where I could feel at home, a place for meditation, a place where he thought he could feel power and control. He tells the detectives that if his arrest had happened 6 months later, that altar would have been complete. Axel's whisper here. Imagine the mind capable of such planning, the patience, the obsession, the calm, almost casual way he recounts it. This is not fiction. This is reality. The confession of a man who terrorized the lives of so many. And for the first time, the world can hear it directly from him.
You ever wonder how someone could hide a darkness so deep, right in plain sight? On July 25th, 1991, Jeffrey Dahmer was finally charged. 4 counts of first-degree murder. Just 4, though. Even then, the horror behind those numbers was unimaginable. But it didn't stop there. By August, investigators had uncovered 11 more murders in Wisconsin, 11 more lives erased, and the world was only beginning to understand the scope of his crimes. Then came Ohio. Imagine walking through a quiet woodland only to find what investigators did, hundreds of bone fragments hidden behind the house where Dahmer had confessed to his very first victim. Among them, 2 molars and a vertebra were identified, matched exactly to Stephen Hicks. That's when the reality hit even harder. This monster wasn't just in Wisconsin. His reach extended beyond state lines. 3 days later, Dahmer was charged in Ohio for Hicks's murder. But here's something most people don't know. He wasn't charged for everything. The attempted murder of Edwards, not charged. The murder of Tuomi, not charged either. Why? Because there was no physical evidence, and Dahmer himself had no memory of committing it. The law could only act on what could be proven beyond a reasonable doubt. Fast forward to January 13th, 1992. Dahmer sits in court, staring back at a world that's still trying to make sense of him. And in that moment, he pleads guilty but insane to 15 counts of murder. 15 lives cut short, 15 families shattered, 15 stories that can never be rewritten. So, here's the question I want you to think about. How does someone like this live among us, unnoticed for so long? How do the signs hide in plain sight? And most importantly, what do we do when the darkness finally reveals itself? Because when it does, there's no turning back.
You're about to step inside one of the most infamous trials in criminal history, Jeffrey Dahmer's trial, which began on January 30th, 1992 in Milwaukee. Dahmer faced 15 counts of first-degree murder, but he had already pleaded guilty but insane, waiving his right to prove guilt in court. The courtroom quickly became a battle of minds. The defense argued that Dahmer was driven by mental illness and uncontrollable impulses, a man overwhelmed by his obsessions, particularly his necrophilic urges. Experts described him as unable to resist his compulsions, a person trapped in a sickness he hadn't chosen. One psychiatrist even testified that Dahmer preferred comatose partners to deceased ones most of the time, highlighting the twisted nature of his obsession. On the other side, the prosecution painted a very different picture. Their experts argued that Dahmer was fully aware of his actions, calculating and capable of distinguishing right from wrong. They emphasized that he carefully planned each murder, often preparing in advance, seeking isolation to avoid witnesses. Alcohol, they claimed, was just a tool to overcome his inhibitions, not a mask for uncontrollable urges. The trial also examined Dahmer's psyche in unexpected ways. His identification with villains in movies like The Exorcist III and Return of the Jedi hinted at a fascination with power and control, which he carried into his crimes. Forensic experts noted a complex personality, antisocial, obsessive, sadistic, borderline, even charming at times, yet capable of horrific violence. Some argued he killed out of self-loathing, others suggested a twisted longing for companionship, but everyone agreed on one thing: Dahmer was deeply disturbed.
After 2 weeks, the courtroom turned to closing arguments. The defense attorney painted Dahmer as a sick, lonely man, a prisoner of his compulsions, incapable of controlling himself. The prosecutor countered, calling him a calculating predator, fully in control, who killed to satisfy his desires while avoiding detection. He argued that Dahmer's guilty but insane plea was nothing more than an attempt to escape full responsibility for his actions. And so, the jury faced a haunting question. Was Jeffrey Dahmer a man overcome by uncontrollable illness, or a conscious, calculating murderer who chose his path of terror? Every testimony, every expert, every chilling detail brought them closer to an answer, but the darkness of Dahmer's mind left the courtroom with more questions than comfort.
February 15, 1992. The courtroom in Milwaukee was silent as the verdict was read. Jeffrey Dahmer was ruled sane, not suffering from a mental disorder at the time of the 15 murders he had committed. 2 jurors dissented, but the decision was clear. Formal sentencing came 2 days later. Dahmer approached the lectern, reading a statement he had prepared. He admitted he had never desired freedom, that he wished for his own death, and that he understood nothing he said or did could undo the terrible harm he had caused the families of his victims and the city of Milwaukee. He spoke of mental disorders, explaining that his doctors believed they had driven his crimes, and that this knowledge gave him, quote, some peace. Dahmer acknowledged society would never forgive him, but he hoped God might. His final words were chillingly honest. I know my time in prison will be terrible, but I deserve whatever I get. I ask for no consideration. The judge sentenced him to life imprisonment plus 10 years for the first 2 counts, and life plus 70 years for the remaining 13. The death penalty was not an option. Wisconsin had abolished it in 1853. Before being transferred to the Columbia Correctional Institution in Portage, Dahmer spent a private 10 minutes with his father and stepmother, exchanging brief hugs and well wishes. 3 months later, Dahmer was extradited to Ohio to face trial for the murder of his first victim, Stephen Hicks. In a hearing lasting just 45 minutes, he again pleaded guilty and received a 16th life sentence.
After sentencing, Jeffrey Dahmer was transferred to the Columbia Correctional Institution. For his first year, he was kept in solitary confinement, a measure taken to protect him from other inmates. During this time, he received letters and gifts from people around the world, money, magazines, cassette tapes, and other items. After a year, Dahmer requested a transfer to a less secure unit, where he worked 2 hours a day cleaning the toilets and later the prison gymnasium. It was here that his life inside prison began to take a different path. Shortly after his confessions, Dahmer had asked for a Bible, and over time he devoted himself to Christianity, eventually becoming a born-again Christian. In May 1994, he was baptized by Minister Roy Ratcliffe in the prison whirlpool. Ratcliffe would visit him weekly, discussing life, death, and faith. Dahmer even admitted that before his arrest, he had struggled with the thought, if a person doesn't think there is a God to be accountable to, then what's the point of trying to modify your behavior? But prison was not without danger. On July 3, 1994, fellow inmate Osvaldo DeRuthi attempted to slash Dahmer's throat after a church service. He survived with only superficial wounds. Dahmer's family, his father, stepmother, and mother, maintained regular contact. He reportedly told his mother, "It doesn't matter. I don't care if something happens to me." In prison, Dahmer's days were marked by routine, reflection, and a sense of acceptance of whatever fate awaited him. Though he lived behind bars, the shadow of his crimes and the questions about his mind lingered on. The morning of November 28, 1994, would mark the end of Jeffrey Dahmer's life. He left his cell for a work detail, accompanied by two fellow inmates, Jesse Anderson and Christopher Scarver. The three were left unsupervised in the prison gym showers for roughly 20 minutes. At around 8:10 a.m., Dahmer was discovered with severe head wounds, bludgeoned repeatedly with a 20-inch metal bar. His head also struck against the wall. He was rushed to a nearby hospital, but died 1 hour later. Anderson had been attacked with the same weapon and succumbed to his injuries 2 days later. Scarver, serving a life sentence for a prior murder, admitted he attacked Dahmer first, then Anderson, claiming, "God told me to do it. Jesse Anderson and Jeffrey Dahmer are dead." He insisted the attacks were not pre-planned, though investigators later found he had concealed the metal bar in his clothing. According to Scarver, Dahmer's final words were chillingly indifferent. "I don't care if I live or die. Go ahead and kill me." The reactions to Dahmer's death were mixed. His mother, Joyce, angrily confronted the media. "Now is everybody happy? Now that he's bludgeoned to death, is that good enough for everyone?" Some families of Dahmer's victims felt relief, while others mourned that he escaped suffering, like Catherine Lacey, mother of victim Oliver Lacey, who said, "The hurt is worse now because he's not suffering like we are." On May 15, 1995, Scarver was sentenced to 2 additional life terms for the murders of Dahmer and Anderson. Dahmer's will requested no services and that he be cremated. In September 1995, his ashes were divided between his parents, after his brain, initially retained for research due to a parental dispute, was also cremated.
As we close the story of Jeffrey Dahmer, I can't help but think about the victims and their families, whose lives were forever changed. Dahmer's actions were monstrous, and yet they also leave us with questions about the human mind, about morality, and about accountability. While the justice system ensured he could harm no one else, the emotional scars remain. It's a tragic story, one that forces us to reflect not just on evil, but on our responsibility to recognize, prevent, and respond to it in the world around us.